to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, September 15th, 2015, halfway through the month here, heading into October and autumn. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Before we get into the news, though, I do want to do a shout-out to Coast Radio. I was on their program last night. I had a really good time, and I just want to thank George and Lisa and Stephanie for getting me on again. And it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of interesting phone calls come in, and I did manage to get the question about Hillary's email server and foundation being evidence of an espionage operation out to that wider audience. And this morning we're seeing a lot more traffic at WhatReallyHappened.com, a lot of new people signing up to be members, so overall it was a very good thing, and I had a really good time. Most of the email I received about it, very, very positive. The usual smattering of, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you want Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. There's always a few of those, which is kind of amazing because we didn't actually talk all that much about Israel last night. It was mostly about the email scandal and the refugee crisis and so forth. But I guess some of these Israeli shills are kind of on autopilot, you know. I must scream anti-Semite, I must scream anti-Semite. You know, like the Daleks from Doctor Who, you know, anti-Semite. There's a cartoon. I got to put that one together. All right, getting on to more serious news. Over in Fallujah, Iraqi health officials are reporting that 8,765 civilians have been killed in Fallujah since the beginning of 2013. Now, each side says it's the other. And this is supposedly the aftermath of the U.S. government's victory in Iraq. Doesn't sound all that victorious. And now we're getting word that actual U.S. combat troops are heading back into Iraq. Boots on the ground. Now, there have already been U.S. forces in Iraq acting as trainers. This is the first group where they're saying, yeah, these guys are going into combat. This is the third U.S. invasion of Iraq because those pesky conquered provinces won't stay conquered. Now, up in Britain, there's a big kerfuffle going on over the fact that David Cameron is following the U.S. policy and going into this idea of state-sanctioned killings without trial, drone strikes, assassinations. And it's a bit like the old analogy of boiling the frog, where we're going to just put it out there a little bit, and then it gets larger and larger and larger and larger. In one case in the U.S., somebody got targeted for a drone strike just for a tweet that was positive about ISIS. I mean, that's how completely out of control this is. We dare not allow any government anywhere to arrogate to itself the right to simply murder at will. There has to be checks and limits on the government's ability to kill people, especially their own citizens. That's certainly the way it was set up here in the United States of America. Now, the British Attorney General is refusing to say whether the British drone policy is handled on a case-by-case basis or if there is simply blanket approval for drone strikes against anybody that the British government doesn't happen to like. And there's an interesting quote in this article regarding carrying out targeted killings in countries with whom the United Kingdom is not at war. Well, I think when you send in robotic aircraft to kill people in other countries, that's a war. Regardless of what label you want to put on it, that is an act of war. And I think we've already crossed that line, certainly with the U.S. Now, David Cameron is still responding to Jeremy Corbyn's victory. And they're really in kind of a lather over there. Cameron is calling Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party a security threat. He's not willing to go to war and kill and murder people. And there's almost a tone of desperation in that the war party that is so firmly entrenched in both Britain and the United States is starting to feel their grip loosen with the ascendancy of Corbyn and the ascendancy of Trump. Now, David Cameron apparently went out on his Facebook to bash Jeremy Corbyn, and his Facebook message got a lot of likes, which may or may not be genuine. Remember, there's a lot of fakery by politicians on Facebook posts, but it did get a lot of complaints. And there's a little bit of a backlash going on there. Meanwhile, Cameron has announced he's prepared to bypass Corbyn and the Labour Party entirely to get the Syria airstrikes approved. And just like Tony Blair, we're going to do the war, we're going to do the war. What the British people want doesn't matter. What the opposition wants doesn't matter. The U.S. has told us to go make war, Israel's told us to go make war, and we shall make war. It's that polarized. Now, up in Ukraine, the situation there is still ongoing, not getting a lot of media coverage. But basically, there is this army, which is supported by European and American money, which is bombing houses and residential buildings, hospitals, orphanages, and schools from 20 kilometers away. Gotta feel really butch about that, right? What would Ron White say? You gotta be a real manly man to use artillery on grammar schools. It's amazing here. Now, over in Russia, Moscow is pointing out the fact that Kiev is basically interfering with drinking water going into Donbas. That's a collective punishment. That's a war crime. The Russians are saying this is right out of the medieval period. This is the sort of thing medieval warlords would do. And they're absolutely right. Because this is not a war in the sense of two peer military groups having at each other. This is a government punishing its own people for not wanting to stay under that government. Now, as you know, a lot of foreign leaders are piling into Ukraine. We've got Saakashvili, former leader of Georgia, is now the mayor of Odessa. He's being polished up as a potential successor to Poroshenko. The ex-foreign minister of Poland, Radoslaw Sikorski, has now been appointed an advisor to Poroshenko. And I have to imagine that the Ukrainian people are very upset that their government doesn't seem to have a lot of Ukrainians left in it, much as a lot of the American people are very upset over all these Israel firsters who dominate our government. Now, the surprise news coming out, though, is that Vladimir Putin, Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, and Poroshenko are going to hold a summit meeting next month, October, to talk about ways to end the conflict in Ukraine. Notice the United States was not invited. Because obviously the United States does not want peace in Ukraine. They see Ukraine as one of several possible openings for a direct confrontation with Russia, Syria being the other one. Now, Russia's envoy to the European Union, Vladimir Chizov, is basically saying that because of all the sanctions and the hostility coming in from the West, the previous state of European Union and Russian relations is really functionally impossible at this point. And if there's going to be commerce and peace, there has to be a rethink, and he's dropping very subtle hints. The problem is all the European nations who want to do business with Russia, but still jump every time the U.S. government says jump. And that's disrupting a lot of things business-wise. And so Russia is delivering a very subtle message. You'd better decide who it is you're doing business with and who you aren't. Because the U.S. is creating a bipolar world. Better decide which side of the line you're going to be on and be prepared to live with that. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break here. We got a caller just now calling in. We'll take that call as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm looking at the corporate media, the coverage of the refugee crisis. Apparently, Hungary has just declared a state of emergency on their border with Serbia to try and stem the flow of people coming in. Just looking at the videos and some of the pictures online, I have to say at this point, the fallout from all of these U.S. invasions, interventions, coup d'etat, drone striking has reached the level where I think, in all honesty, we can call it a crime against humanity. This is the largest refugee crisis since World War II. and they're making a big deal over the fact that some Cubans managed to cross over to Florida in a little sailboat, which in good weather, that's not that difficult. And the U.S. is putting out, we're committed to taking in more refugees, which, okay, are you going to put them up in your house? Because I think it's a little irritating. We have all these people out there saying, we must take in the refugees, except it's going to be in your neighborhood, using up your resources, your water, you're taking your jobs. All these people out there saying, we must accept the refugees, they're not opening their own homes to bring them on in, put them in the guest room. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good job last night on Coast to Coast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just had a question. One of the other independent media stations had on their website this UN train going through Wheaton, Illinois. I don't know, did you get a chance to see that by chance?
I saw it sort of whiz on by, but I saw the thing about the train. I didn't know it was identified as United Nations.
Yeah, clearly on the vehicles it had UN plastered all over them. It was going through Wheaton, Illinois. It was just after midnight. Somebody had videotaped it, put it out there, and said, what do you think? What's going on with this?
Well, let me ask you a question. The United Nations is located in New York. Where do they buy their vehicles? Where are they manufactured?
I would think Detroit, don't you?
Maybe, maybe not. But I know in at least one case where somebody said, oh, there's all these trainloads of all these trucks going by, and it turned out they were being taken from the factory to the port where they were going to be shipped to other countries. So until you see them driving down the middle of your street with guns bristling all over them, frankly, I wouldn't get that upset.
Okay. Hey, another thing, they were talking also on the news, I think SRN News talked about, I'm sure this comes from government, they're trying to spur the economy, get it going here, but it's funny that they have already come out and said that people are already buying for Christmas this year,
yes.
And that they expect a bumper Christmas year already. And I just got back from the Walmart, and I have to laugh. I couldn't believe what I saw, but they'd already set up the Christmas trees.
Oh yeah, it's all over. They've got it up there, and you're absolutely right. Every year about this time, the Christmas shoppers are out there. It's going to be a great Christmas, and then it's a disaster. And you're right. It's an absolute bluff to convince everybody your friends and neighbors are already out there Christmas shopping, and you should be too. And it's all applied psychology and advertising to try and get people to spend money. We don't have it anymore. Okay? That's really what it comes down to. It's going to be another disastrous Christmas. Next January, we're going to hear another round of retail corporations going out of business because we don't have money to pour into the consumer economy. It's all been siphoned away by the money junkies for the war economy, to prop up Wall Street, to prop up Israel. We have nothing left. And apparently in the halls of Wall Street in Washington, D.C., where they're rolling in the dough, let's be honest, they can't imagine that there isn't vast sums of wealth out here in the hinterland, and they just have to figure out a clever way to get their talons on it. But it's just not so. And, like I said, we're seeing the Christmas stuff go up around here, and it's not selling. They've already got the Thanksgiving and the Halloween and everything. It's just a constant flog. Buy. Nobody's buying. Nobody has any money. Macy's is shutting down a bunch of their stores. They're shifting their focus to online sales, which is unfortunately puts more retailers out of work. And for some reason, Wall Street seems oblivious to the fact that every time you let another employee go, you're getting rid of another potential customer for the entire economy. And they're all thinking about their own business. I'm going to let most of my employees go, and I'll make a lot more money, and the system will fix itself. No, it isn't. When everybody is letting their employees go, 94 million Americans willing and able to work cannot find a job. That's 94 million Americans who are not going to be buying anything for Christmas this year, let alone Halloween or Thanksgiving or New Year. And because they start so early, it burns out. By the time we actually get into December, it's no longer decoration, it's decor, and it's very tacky. And as enthusiastic about Christmas as I try and start out the season every year, by the time we get there, it's so oversaturated, I'm in full-bore Ebenezer Scrooge mode. I'm ready to boil them in their own pudding and bury them with a stake of holly through their heart. And
Michael, we should have all suspected how the economy is really doing when corporate actually, when you start seeing those self-serves pop up, you check yourself out at the grocery store, at the Walmart, you should have been suspicious then. We all should have been suspicious then that they're letting people go.
Yes.
They're now using technology, and that's not a good thing, a good sign of the economy.
I won't use those. I won't use those self-serve checkouts.
I don't either. I don't either for the main reason. People ask me, why don't you do that? I said, because I want to keep people working, for God's sakes. If we all do this checkout, self-checkout thing, then there's no use for these people. You know, we have to keep America working, and this is going against that principle.
Yeah, and what really annoys me is we've got these 94 million legal American citizens who have not been able to find work for years, and U.S. government policy is bringing in all these migrants across the border with Mexico, and now all these additional refugees pouring in from all the U.S.-started war zones. And it's like nobody in Washington, D.C. is thinking about the whole picture. It's just a town of everybody going after their immediate agenda as defined for them by their backers, supporters, and controllers. And there's nobody maintaining the overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. And if there's one office in this land that should be doing that as the job description, that's the Oval Office. And I'm afraid that Obama has failed in that task. So did Bush. So did Clinton and Elder Bush. They're all about serving their supporters and backers, and nobody is really maintaining the long view and the overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. It's an absolute amazing omission in policy planning in this country.
You know, they're accepting of all these Syrians coming in, and they keep increasing the number for humanitarian reasons.
Yeah, humanitarian, and we're going to be getting the same percentage of these people coming in who are criminals in their own land, and carrying contagious diseases.
Yeah, but this clearly could break the back of the welfare system too. It's already stretched really far right now.
It could do that. It could shatter the European Union. But I think a big part of it is I think this is the last desperate push to sell the idea of a global government by just blurring all of humanity together into one undifferentiated crowd of people. So you can't say, we're American, and no, you used to be American, now you're Libby, Syri, America, Afghanis, whatever. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Steve, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and start with a phone call. Sherry in Missouri, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. What I'm curious about is that I've always the truth is important.
Yes.
And I think you speak a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't believe in God. Okay.
Correct.
So what I'm curious about, and what my question is that, what the last gentleman said, how do you practice Christmas? Then, or do you not?
Well, I haven't recently. It's been very hard for me to get into the Christmas spirit when our government is bombing the people you see in those little nativity scenes to steal their oil. But you know, I was raised in a Christian household, and it's part of my tradition. And I enjoy Christmas just for being a festive time in the midwinter festival, and I celebrate it by buying stuff and giving it to little kids in in the family and the neighbors, and that seems like a pretty good thing to do.
Right, but how do you correlate that with not being associated with the Lord?
It's just a holiday. It's just a holiday. It's an excuse to have fun and to look at old traditions and everything. And I don't see a serious disconnect from that. Because and I certainly have no objection to anybody else celebrating Christmas. It's just
neither do I.
Okay, well then, let's live and let live here, and I don't really think it's an issue. So, Sherry, thank you very much. I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to get on back to some interesting stories. There is a story coming out of Sputnik News where a U.S. Air Force general is out there screaming about the missile gap or the plane gap or the ship gap, which is usually when they start using that word gap, it's a beg for more money because we have to maintain our superiority over whoever we're supposed to be, dealing with here. So anyway, this U.S. military is essentially admitting what we have been telling you for a long time. The current generation of American weapons, as expensive as they are not very good. And this general is out there saying the Russians have closed the gap. Well, the Russians and the Chinese have been doing a lot of very good work in developing military technology, but the closing of the gap is more like the U.S. tossed away the advantage we used to have. Because in the United States, weapons procurement is all about making money for the defense contractors and, fat campaign donation checks to members of Congress who support war spending. And under this model of cost-plus contracting, U.S. weapons grow and grow and grow, and things get added on, and they become these expensive, bloated gadgets that look good in demonstrations, but are not really effective weapons. Now, Russia and China, when they spend money for weapons development, the goal is effective weapons, not making a bunch of cronies rich. And that means they make more effective weapons at lower cost, which means they can produce more of them. More bang for their buck. And we've talked about many of the problems with the U.S. weapons. The Gerald R. Ford is having all kinds of problems with its radar systems, with its magnetic railgun catapult system. We've been talking about the F-22, the Independence-class littoral combat ship. And now, to illustrate this point, there's another story coming on out, how in order to meet the congressional deadline of having the F-35 in combat service no later than December of 2016, the Air Force has actually watered down the F-35. They're basically taking all the stuff that's not going to be ready and say, we didn't need it anyway. And they're basically saying it will not be anywhere near as effective as was originally intended. They're basically throwing away the capabilities to make a politically mandated deadline. And it has been a boondoggle. In fact, the whole thing really ought to be scrapped completely after all that money. Why throw more good money after bad to come up with an airplane that can be shot out of the sky by a 1960s vintage fighter? Because the military-industrial complex is not about military or even industry. It's all about money. Money, 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 money. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, 160 U.S. fighting forces, combat troops, have landed in Anbar province to go after ISIS, in theory. And whereas the earlier U.S. forces in Iraq were described as trainers and advisors, they're admitting these people are there to put holes in the bad guys. This marks the third U.S. invasion of Iraq. And between that and the second invasion of Libya and the second invasion of Yemen, it's looking like the American empire is having real difficulty hanging on to those pesky conquered provinces, doesn't it? Remember when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this plan to conquer the entire Middle East and bring it under U.S. control. The end of the timeline was 2008. And here we are in 2015, almost to 2016. And they're still thrashing around in all these quagmires. Now, Syria is rapidly becoming a flashpoint, and everyone's up in arms about the military deployment by the Russians in Syria. They're just cranking, they shouldn't be going on in there. Now, something you all need to keep in mind right from the start. The legitimate government of Syria has asked Russia for help against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The legitimate government of Syria has not asked the United States and its coalition to bomb the crud out of their country. Now, going from that start, it's rather amazing to see the corporate media just demonize Russia and just do the fear-mongering. There's a story coming out of America Online, Russia positioning tanks at Syria airfield. We don't know what Russia's intentions are. Well, actually we do. Russia has already stated their intention. They're going to whip Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or the phonies pretending to be them, and take away the U.S. justification for bombing Syria. Americans, you can go home now. We got ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're all gone. You don't need to bomb Syria anymore. By the way, we're talking a grand total of 6 tanks that the Western media is making a big upset about. 6 tanks. And they're very good tanks, but 6 tanks is not enough to really cause a lot of problems for the U.S. Certainly not. Story coming out of Off Guardian, which is a website devoted to pointing out very overt propagandists in the corporate media. They're taking Nick Cohen to task because he's trying to revive this old canard, about Syria is using chemical weapons on their own people. I mean, how many times are they going to try that lie with us? And it's all about whipping up people to go back to war, and of course, pointing out the fact that our side has used chemical weapons. Our side gave chemical weapons to the rebels to use on the Syrian people to blame on Assad. Winston Churchill advocated the use of chemical weapons in Iraq, saying it would spread a lively terror. Not quite the image of Winston Churchill the history books give us. But there is a certain amount of hypocrisy and double standard. When we do it, it's nation building and freedom and humanitarian invasion, and when the other side does it, ooh, they're evil, they're bad. Basically, what's going on is Putin called the U.S. bluff about ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and now the U.S. is finding itself outmaneuvered. They don't know what to do about it, except thrash around and scream and cry and say, if you come on in, you're going to spoil our party, which we all know that's exactly what the problem is. Russia is spoiling the U.S. party in Syria. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on in Syria. Now, yesterday, we reported on the discovery by Sky News that the Syrian refugees getting ready to enter Europe were being handed these little booklets with maps, tips, phone lines of social services, welfare, whatever they could call to get all kinds of free stuff. And it was all coming out of an organization funded by George Soros. And a lot of the European countries, especially Hungary, are saying, what are you doing? And the organization in question was out there saying, you have the freedom to go wherever you want. If you live in the third world, you have a right to march into the first world because the first world was built on the money looted from the third world, which there may be an element of truth to, I will grant you. But when I heard that, the first thing I thought of was the character of Bane in the movie Dark Knight Rises, where he's out there saying, go ahead, take what you want, it's really yours. And, of course, leading to all sorts of bad things happening here. Well, there's another story coming out here from the 21st Century Wire talking about one of these organizations supposed to be a humanitarian aid organization called the White Helmets. And they have been outed as a covert front that is trying to open the door to direct foreign military intervention. Another one funded by George Soros. So many of these so-called humanitarian aid organizations are turning out to be intelligence agency fronts. U.S. aid got kicked out of Russia when they were caught funding the opposition and trying to stir up riots. They were right in the heart of what was going on in Kiev. Haven't learned any lessons from past mistakes, apparently. U.S.-backed forces in Yemen are escalating their airstrikes because, by golly, when we put a puppet ruler over your country, you, by golly, keep them. Don't you dare kick out your U.S. puppet ruler. Bad things will happen to you. The United Nations has come out saying that the U.S. drone strikes in Yemen, supposedly targeting Al-Qaeda, are killing more civilians than Al-Qaeda. Now, from the U.S. point of view, that's collateral damage. That's what they get for standing next to a suspected terrorist. And that's something else you need to remember. There's no confirmation any of these people being targeted by the United States has actually done anything at all. The targeting is done by profiling. That's it. People are being killed because they wear a certain piece of clothing, or they're walking a certain way, or they were seen passing somebody who's suspected. That's it. It's just random killings into a population to terrorize them into submission. The United States is using the drone strikes exact same purpose that Adolf Hitler used the V-1 buzz bomb and the V-2 ballistic missile. Terror strikes into the civilian population of Britain to get them to surrender. Which, by the way, didn't work. It hardened British resolve to support their government against the Nazis. So why the U.S. thinks that same tactic is going to work now boggles the mind. And so far, it hasn't. The drone strikes are angering these populations against the United States of America. Maybe that's what they want, trying to whip up this war where all the Christians kill all the Muslims and Israel inherits the world. And then, of course, who will pay retail then? Now, speaking of Israel, Israel has apparently desecrated Islam's third holiest site for the third day in a row, and basically just going on in, clearing the way for extremist settlers to enter the compound where they're not supposed to go, and create all kinds of mayhem. Now, Israel is saying that they had to do this because they were aware of a Palestinian plot to harass tourists. Absolutely no evidence about it. Now, under international agreement, Jordan administers the holy sites in Jerusalem and has done an amazing balancing act of trying to say, okay, the Christians get this, and the Muslims get this, and the Jews get this, and let's all try and get along together. Now, King Abdullah II has issued a statement saying that any more provocations in Jerusalem are going to affect the relationship between Jordan and Israel. Now, Jordan has even gone so far as to say that these raids into the Al-Aqsa Mosque are a flagrant aggression. They're totally unjustified. And we know why Israel's doing it. Israel's trying to provoke a response. They're going to go on desecrating the Al-Aqsa Mosque until somebody does something that Israel can say, oh, see, the Muslims are attacking us again, and bomb the heck out of Gaza again. Now, Egyptian President El-Sisi, surprisingly, is standing up to Israel on this as well, saying, we back Jordan. These are provocations. These are acts of aggression. They don't serve any civil purpose whatsoever. It's just desecrating a Muslim holy place just for the sake of desecrating a Muslim holy place. And by the way, it's not just Muslim holy places. When there was a few years ago this situation where some protesters had sought refuge inside one of the Christian churches. I think it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they were surrounded by the Israeli forces. The Israeli forces were urinating on the church. They just sort of like to do that sort of thing here. Now, over here in the United States, for some reason, Israel is still clinging to a fond hope they're going to find a way to kill the P5+1 deal, at least for the United States, to open the door for American kids to go and make war on Iran, to smash it into little tiny pieces, make sure Iran's oil is sold only for the U.S. dollar, to get Iran to accept private central banking, you know, the whole agenda that's out there. And AIPAC has suffered a pretty stunning failure so far. And everybody has seen them do it. I mean, up until now, AIPAC had this reputation for infallibility and invincibility. And they've taken a real black eye over the P5+1 deal, just like the British Israel lobby took a black eye over Corbyn's election. So now we're seeing a report coming out of Mondoweiss that Israel is directing all of their little activist groups on American college campuses to switch their focus away from supporting Israel and demonizing Palestine to basically selling the idea that the P5+1 deal with Iran is a bad thing and they should go home and tell their parents and employers and everybody else to call up members of Congress and get them to change their mind. Now, what's really interesting is the students who are in these pro-Israel groups on campus are saying, this is a mistake, because up until now it was all about Israel and Palestine, and there's been some resistance to that, but the instant they take an advocacy position on this kind of a national policy, that will trigger a backlash, and the fact that they're working for Israel is going to be very obvious to everybody on campus, just like the fact that the U.S. Congress is working for Israel is now very obvious to the American voters. And there was one student activist, Justin Hayat, who had a very cogent comment. The Iran deal can't define Israel activism. And going down this path, the pro-Israel community is being perceived as a group of right-wing fanatics, and he's absolutely right. And Israel is hoisting themselves on their own Iran petard with this. And the harder Netanyahu pushes, the more damage he does to Israel's influence over this culture, which is a good thing in my book. So go get him, Bibi. The more the merrier here. All right, when we come back into hour number 2, we're going to be talking about this horrible migrant crisis. Did it just happen? Is it being fanned up for political gain? There are arguments pro and con. But one thing that is not in doubt is the immense degree of suffering that we are seeing from these people driven from their homes and forced to just travel thousands and thousands of miles with just a faint hope of some kind of help and support and life when they reach whatever destination it is they're going to reach. Many people don't even know where they're going to end up. It is a horrible crime against humanity, the worst refugee crisis since World War II, and it's only just getting started. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Andrew in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I heard you on Coast to Coast AM, and you were saying how, like, the way you wake up and realize how the government's done is, like, through the Vince Foster murder, and you had a picture, and you saw how it was faked, and the people in Hollywood, and you said CNN studio saw this, and they immediately fired you and shows how Hollywood is being really controlled.
Oh, well, there's no question. I mean, Hollywood is like the core of propaganda, and it's no secret that the government tries to control Hollywood either just through direct political connection or covertly. Both the CIA and the FBI are all throughout Hollywood. In fact, if you go to my COINTELPRO page at WhatReallyHappened.com, there's a subsection there on how the FBI will tell writers to change scripts that don't make the FBI look like they're wonderful heroes. There's an interesting story. If you remember the movie The FBI Story starring Jimmy Stewart, J. Edgar Hoover was actually on the set of that film while it was being made, telling the director how to make the movie to put out the image of the FBI Hoover thought should be put out there. And Hoover actually appears in the film once from the back only because he was very guarded about his privacy at that point. But that's happened all along. It's no secret. I mean, Hoover believed that the film industry should serve the propaganda interests of the government, and even before he was head of the FBI, he was out there in Hollywood trying to convince them to make movies that made, government officials look good and all of our enemies look bad. And he ran head-to-head into Charlie Chaplin, whose staple with his audience was portraying anybody in an official uniform as an oafish buffoon, and that's what his audience wanted to see and paid to see. And so Charlie Chaplin told Hoover to basically leave him alone, and Hoover ultimately was instrumental in getting Charlie Chaplin's citizenship revoked and getting him kicked out of the country. And it actually took a special act of the United States Congress to allow Charlie Chaplin back into the United States long enough to get his Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. As other issues, the blacklisting of Jean Seberg was a very popular actress in the 1960s and very popular in the U.S. and Europe. And she was very supportive of the civil rights movement at a time when the White House really wanted to maintain friction between blacks and whites so they wouldn't unite against the war in Vietnam. And so they destroyed Jean Seberg's career by planting a bogus story in the Los Angeles Times gossip column written by Joyce Haber that Jean Seberg was pregnant. She was married at the time. She was pregnant out of wedlock with a Black Panther. And even though the 1960s was the summer of love and all this other stuff, the nation was still very twitchy about interracial sex, let alone getting pregnant by a black man when you're married to a white guy. And the story destroyed Seberg's career. She suffered a miscarriage. They actually held a funeral for the fetus so that everybody could see it was a white child. And fortunately, Seberg's husband was a French diplomat who got hold of the official FBI records, setting this whole thing up, saying, yeah, we're going to destroy this person's career because she's refusing to toe the line, and made a big stink about it and forced the FBI to apologize for once in its sordid career. But this is what the FBI really does. And as I mentioned on Coast to Coast last night, and longtime listeners and readers know the story, I was working in the film industry in Hollywood back in 1994, And they put out this picture leaked by the White House to Reuters showing the hand of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster next to the gun with which he had supposedly shot himself in the mouth. And I was working in visual effects. It was my business to know what made things look real or not. And the instant I saw that picture, I knew it was staged. There were too many things that should have been there that were not. And I went into this animation shop I was doing a project for that shared the same building as CNN's Hollywood's division. And during lunchtime, I was showing the picture around to people and saying, this is not right. And everybody was agreeing with me. And I remember very clearly, some people from CNN were at the next table listening to me. And that night, the threatening phone call started, and my career just evaporated. And since I had all this free time on my hand, all of a sudden, I kept on looking into the Vince Foster affair, and I found the actual FBI documents showing that they were manufacturing the testimony of the widow, Lisa Foster, to try and tell everybody that the black gun found with the body was Vince Foster's gun, which was not true. Vince Foster's own gun that he inherited from his father was a nickel-plated, silver-colored revolver. It's even described by the FBI agents interviewing Lisa Foster as silver-colored. And Robert Fisk took that identification of the silver gun and rewrote it to say Lisa Foster identified the black gun found with the body as belonging to Vince Foster. I mean, that's how obvious the cover-up was. And that inadvertently launched me on my career as a truth activist. I mean, there never was a moment in my life where I said, I'm going to just throw away a promising career in the motion picture visual effects industry to become a truth activist. It just happened by accident. And here we are 21 years later and doing what we're doing.
In Hollywood, like, if you look at the World War II movies, like, they promote, like, this patriot, like, sense and, like, these, like nationalistic and, like, I think it's no accident.
Well, you know, I don't actually have a problem with that, you know, because the nation was at war. I do have a problem, though, with, after World War II, when Hollywood was directed to start bashing the Russians to support the Cold War, and a lot of people dug in their heels and said, wait a minute, the Russians were our allies against Nazi Germany. Why are we all of a sudden supposed to make movies making them the villain? And those people who stood their moral ground got kicked out of Hollywood, much the same way that I did. And if you go to the little submenu at the top of WhatReallyHappened.com, look for an article called The New McCarthyism, and it goes into tremendous depth there. This whole McCarthy blacklisting, what they were doing was scrubbing Hollywood of anybody who refused to make movies the way the government wanted them made. And that's what McCarthyism was really all about.
No, I just wanted to say, like, since, like, the U.S. today is trying to start World War III, and maybe, like, they want to make people, like, how the movies in World War II show, like, people listening to the government and being, like, cheerful, like, what goes on, and they want to teach the same propaganda as... Oh,
there's no question. There's no question Hollywood's gone down the same route. I can't support it this time because very obviously the U.S. is the aggressor this time, but we're seeing all of that. I remember the year that Avatar came out, which is still my all-time favorite movie, and it got snubbed by the Academy Awards to hand the Oscar to The Hurt Locker, which was this pro-war statement. And there's a part of me that's actually kind of glad I'm not involved in the film industry anymore because I would have to make some moral compromises I wouldn't be comfortable making. And at least with industrial films, there's no political agenda, and the clients are nowhere near as crazy, and, you know, I have a lot more fun working the industrial film angle. So, but yeah, Hollywood is completely compromised. It's controlled by, certainly by the Jewish influence, Israel's influence, Mockingbird, which is the CIA program. And yes, because it is such an instrument for influencing public opinion, it's always been a target for the intelligence agencies of our government and foreign governments.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Yeah, 21 years. I honestly did not think it was going to go on this long. I honestly thought when I put out the evidence that there had been a cover-up in the murder of Vincent Foster that the honorable people in our government would stand up and say, this shall not stand. Of course, 21 years later, we come to understand there aren't any honorable, ethical people left in government. They were scrubbed out long, long ago. So, as it all comes apart, I have zero sympathy for any of them. All right, well, we used up that segment on the walk down memory lane here. We're coming up on another commercial break. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about the migrant crisis, and it truly is, and apparently things are really heating up along that border between Hungary and Serbia. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there is no doubt that we are witnessing a major humanitarian crisis going on with all of these refugees streaming out of all the countries the U.S. has made war on, trying to find a better life. And, of course, the countries they're streaming to are all under stress. Their economies are in trouble. They don't have enough jobs and resources for the people who are already living there. Inevitably, there's going to be a clash, and the focus right now is on the border between Serbia and Hungary, where Hungary has put up barricades and razor wire, and other nations in the European Union are starting to do exactly the same. Everyone was worried that the Greek economic crisis might shatter the European Union. It looks like the immigration crisis may do that more easily, more quickly. So there's a confrontation going on at that border. And meanwhile, Hungary's prime minister is slamming these Soros-funded advocacy groups, saying they're all making a living off of this crisis. They're out here pushing their political agendas and they're getting funded. Turkey is starting to take their refugees and kick them out over the border and say, go to Europe. So is this happening just by accident? Or is it being fanned up for political gain? There's no question that everybody's trying to exploit it for whatever their particular political agenda happens to be for that moment. And one possibility, of course, is that Obama may have been thinking that a sudden surge of Libyan, Syrian, everywhere we've invaded refugees pouring into Europe. But the focus is on the Syrians. Have you noticed that? When they talk about the refugees, it's always the Syrian refugees. They don't mention the Libyans. They don't mention any of the others. It's the Syrian refugees. And so I think the White House plan may have been to let all these Syrians go up to Europe and spook everybody, so that Europe would back a U.S. plan to break Syria into pieces, to create a safe haven for all the Syrians to move back, which coincidentally would be under U.S. puppet rule, and have all the oil fields, which are now under the control of the U.S. proxy ISIS, and they just carve off this little bit around Damascus for Assad to rule this little chip over there by the Mediterranean. But it's backfired. Because what's going on is all of a sudden Europeans are waking up to the reality. There's a major war out there. They're staring the results of it in the face. They know that these people trying to get into Europe are all fleeing countries that are being attacked, overthrown, drone-struck by the U.S. and its proxies. And they're looking at the human cost of U.S. aggressions. And we're already starting to see some of the countries in Europe are pulling away from the U.S. sphere of influence. France and Germany are joining the Russian anti-ISIS coalition because they understand Russia's really going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The U.S. is using them as an excuse to make war on Syria. And the Europeans do not want a new world war, especially one fought on their front lawns, because they have been through that already twice. So we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Rob in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Earlier someone called in and asked if you'd seen the video of the transports of vehicles at Wheeling, Illinois. And I did see that video. Kind of, I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but when they called in and asked, it made me recall that in Oshkosh, there's a truck manufacturing facility, and it's called Oshkosh Defense. And that's the sort of vehicle that they build. If you go to OshkoshDefense.com, you can see all their things. And that's just 140 miles north of Wheeling, Illinois. So I believe you're probably on track with that, probably just being transported to a port to be exported.
Yeah, well, and glad that they're spending their money here in the United States of America, because we certainly need the jobs.
Yeah, I tried to do a search for Oshkosh Defense awarded UN contract, and it came up with $6.7 billion awarded by the military for vehicles to be built to replace the Humvees. So, yeah, that'll be some money spent pretty close by.
Okay, well that's good. Because after the war party collapses, we can buy all those things surplus and turn them into campers.
There you go. Say, speaking of Oshkosh, have you ever been to the fly-in?
No, I always wanted to go. Back when I was actually taking flight training, it was like the Mecca. I wanted to get up, but I never did, unfortunately. I've never been to Sturgis. I've never been to Burning Man. I've lived such a sheltered, deprived life.
Well, I haven't been near the places that you have, but I'm just 3 hours from Oshkosh, and I did manage to go 5 years in a row. Someday I will tell you my Spaceship One story from Oshkosh if you
Oh, I would love to hear it. I'm a great admirer of Dick Rutan and Bert Rutan and all of that work that they're doing, and I'm sorry they're having the troubles that they're having.
Oh, you want to hear my story?
Well, real quick, we got 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah. If you ever go to the fly-in is huge. It's the ground it covers is bigger than 6 state fairgrounds at Minnesota State Fairgrounds. It's just huge, and it's airplanes everywhere. They're just airplanes everywhere, and all the airplanes flying out there. A lot of them, they all sport logos of corporate sponsors, and of course, one of the strong sponsors is Oracle.
Yes.
And they also have these big forum tents that are, they used to actually put up tents, but now they have pavilions, 3 open-sided pavilions.
We got about 1 minute left. Make it March.
Okay. Anyway, Bert Rutan was giving a thing, and he's talking. Oh, why won't someone fund the Spaceship One prize? We just need and I stood up and I said, well, you know how to get that funded, don't you? And he goes, no, how? And I said, well, can you imagine if John Glenn and I forgot the other guy was in Larry Oracle's office and said, do you think he could say no? And he goes, who's Larry Oracle?
Oh, okay.
And the funny thing is that morning I had breakfast with a bunch of people that were from Microsoft's campus. We were all at the Friar Donut place, and we were talking airplanes. And yeah, we work for Microsoft out there. So, and Bert Rutan is always a big draw, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were in the office, and they probably got a big chuckle out of that. So. Okay,
well, listen, I got to let you go. We're taking a break for our commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go ahead and take ourselves another phone call here. Isaac up in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. How are you doing, sir?
Doing fine.
Thank you for taking my call. I was just going to ask you if you had heard anything. I had one of these G.I. Joe, rah, Canadian Forces, lifelong Canadian Forces types at my house the other day, and he was being deployed in a couple of days to go in and as kind of the initial troops that we're sending over. Apparently Canada is building a base in the Ukraine. And I asked him, I said, oh, is this kind of just a joint to NATO kind of thing? And he just looked at the ground and he was like, no. He was not thrilled at all of my line of questioning, and I just kind of left it at that. And I actually emailed Michelle Chosadovsky of Global Research to see if he knew anything, because he's kind of in our neck of the woods in Canada here. And he just replied, thank you for informing me, but he didn't have any further information for me, so I was just kind of curious.
Well, I think the situation right now, to judge from our corporate media, is they don't want us thinking at all about what's going on in Syria or Ukraine. The situation is very much in flux, and obviously military preparations, for the most part, are not going to be shared with the public unless it's so large and obvious that somebody's going to notice. When they announce a military operation, usually it's to send a message to the other side. And with Ukraine building up to a flashpoint, I imagine that probably they're trying to get as many weapons and preparations in there as they can without being noticed, and then there's going to be this huge, gigantic shove to recapture Donbass and Lugansk and bring them back into the gentle embrace of the European Central Bank.
Yeah, extremely. I find it extremely disturbing and disgusting, Mr. Harper's lockstep with the U.S. and its proxies.
Well, look what that got Australia's Abbott. He was in lockstep with all this thing. He just got the old heave-ho. And I'm hearing from a lot of our Canadian listeners and readers that Harper's re-election in the coming elections is not a study in foregone conclusions.
Not a shoo-in, not a guaranteed deal. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, just as in the States, it's kind of Larry, Curly, and Moe. I mean, literally, we have the three people, and I'm not holding my breath that. And of course, with any democracy, it's all who's going to promise.
Well, there is a positive, though. There is a positive with constantly changing your leaders. First of all, to remind them that they can be voted out of office very quickly, and second, to not let any one leader build up enough momentum to really wreck the place. And that on that basis alone, you ought to vote Harper out this next election.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I fully agree. So yeah, I found it interesting that you'd think I scoured the internet. You'd think there'd be, with as large a budget as would be required to build a whole new base in the Ukraine. You'd think there'd be some kind of record online somewhere, but so anyway, I just found it interesting.
Well, it may not be building like a whole huge base, like with runways and permanent buildings. It may just be a forward deployed, rapid
lily pad base.
Yeah, lily pad base, rapid response force kind of a thing, where they just basically send everything with an airplane, set up the tents, and that's the extent of the base. So, everybody's moving around. Everybody's inching toward this big war that all the money junkies seem to want.
Yeah, they really are pushing for it. It's going to be a very interesting and tenuous situation in the coming months and years, I guess. I mean, it's extremely hard when the globalists think in terms of decades. And we're.
I don't think they are. I think the problem is they're thinking in terms of the next quarterly stock report. And I think the push for war right now, I mean, again, there's overlapping agendas. Wars and assassinations never happen for just one reason. But I think there's the reason for the big rush right now is everybody understands the economy, the global economy, the Western economy is about to come apart at the seams. And if they don't have a bloody global war on which to blame it, then the people of the United States, Canada, all of Europe, they're going to stand up and say it was those private central banks that wrecked the place and our politicians who sold us into their slavery. And I think that's why they're really trying to get a bloody war going, because then they can duck responsibility for what they've done and say, it's not our fault, it's those gosh darn Ruskies, it's the gosh darn Chinese, you go hate them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, it's like Gerald Celenti's always saying, right? When all else fails, they take you to war. Bullets, bombs, and banks.
Yeah, that's exactly it. He's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. We're going to let you go here. Now then, turning to the economy, it's kind of interesting. When I was on Coast to Coast last night, we got into economic fraud, and I kept telling George Noory, it's all fraud. Gold and silver prices, the stock market rigging, LIBOR, interest rates, all of this stuff. Every day there's another story, and by golly, sure enough, this morning, Citigroup was using the taxpayer bailout funds at the same time they were committing a felony in foreign currency trading. And why are we spending taxpayer money to keep Citigroup going when they're committing crimes and fraud? Kind of makes every American taxpayer an accessory after the fact. And I'm sure you're probably not happy about that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of retailers are closing stores even before the Christmas rush, which tells you how little confidence they actually have in it. Macy's is shutting a bunch of stores. They're trying to shift into online sales only. Apparently, the Tribune newspaper chain is in serious trouble. Their readership is collapsing, and so is their ad revenues, and they're looking at major staffing cuts to the Los Angeles Times and other Tribune papers, and I have no sympathy for them because nobody likes a liar. And we have neighborhood kid sells local papers out here right at the end of our driveway. And every time we walk past, you want to buy a paper? Nope. Don't need to spend money to be lied to. I can get lies for free on the corporate news. But that's really what's happened. All of the corporate media stood shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. government and the war machine and lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons and torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin and all the rest of it. And everybody knows it now, and that's why polls are showing consistently the majority of Americans are coming to the Internet and the independent media to find out what's really going on. We are the modern incarnation of the samizdat, the network of fax machines that was instrumental in educating the people in the Soviet Union as to what their government was up to, leading to its downfall. Now, as that caller mentioned before, there's a piece of propaganda out there where 32 million Americans ready to go Christmas shopping. I don't think so. I think this is pure public relations to try and get everybody stimulated to go shopping early and start spending money they don't have. Whip out those plastic credit cards. If you're not borrowing to the hilt, the terrorists will win. Now, another indicator of what's going on, industrial production plunges the most in 3 years as the automaker nightmare comes true. And basically what's been going on, without going into the numbers, the automakers have been making a lot of cars that are still sitting on lots, waiting to be sold. And if you've seen the car commercials, you know what amazing deals they're making right now. If anybody had money, they'd be selling those cars like crazy. But the sales aren't keeping up with manufacturing, and the whole production line is beginning to lock up. And when you're talking about an automotive production line and supply chain, it's very slow to start, very slow to bring down, and they can't just turn it off one day and turn it back on the next day. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Frank in London. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. First, good night. What it is I'm talking about the attack, the new Labour Party leader mania that is taking place in Britain right now among the mainstream media that has reached ridiculous proportions. I mean, you had George Galloway. He made a quite pertinent remark about our Prime Minister. I forgot the guy's name now.
Cameron.
Cameron, yeah, that's how much regard I got for this guy. That his comments about the Labour leader, Jamie Corbyn, is unbecoming of a Prime Minister, and saying things like he's a threat to, going along with the thing that the new bandwagon now about he would be a threat to national security and all that kind of thing. I mean,
Cameron's throwing a tantrum. Cameron is throwing a tantrum like a little child, and the entire political establishment with him. And Corbyn's victory has had shockwaves not just in Britain but here in the United States, because all of a sudden everybody's saying, anybody who thinks Donald Trump can't win the White House, you take a look what just happened over there in Britain. And it looks like the dawning of the age of the political mavericks is on us. Abbott just got booted out. Harper's not going to survive his next election in all likelihood. And certainly our two dynastic ruling families, the Bushes and the Clintons, are already looking like they're in the trash can as far as next year's concerned.
Yes, because I believe a lot of people have waken up to this kind of dynastic hold on office is wrong, and you know it's a nest for corruption. That's what they've created, and in Great Britain, it's no different with the Conservative government. It is no different whatsoever. And this rot, now people are beginning to realize that this rot has to stop. And amazingly enough, a lot of people that voted Jamie Corbyn in, they were under 30s. So that in itself is saying something about people are waking up to the fact that this whole political system is there to serve the banking elite. And
yes.
These are what Cameron, these people are. They're servants of the banking elite and nothing more.
Well, you know, in their rush to create a single global government and a single global bank, the elites have created a political climate in which we're seeing the beginnings of a global peaceful revolution to kick these money junkies and their lackeys out of office all over the planet. And that's why they're rattled, and that's why they're panicking, and the pretense of dignity is gone. Cameron just showed that. He's acting like a spoiled child, and somebody just took his lollipop away from him.
Yeah, my sentiments exactly. Thank you much, Mike.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Okay, getting on back to the economic news. Deutsche Bank has announced they're going to close almost all their Russian operations, except from transaction banking services. And whether they're doing it as a cost-cutting move or as part of the let's sneer at Russia is kind of up for debate. Now remember, Germany's government has moved away from the U.S. anti-Russian agenda and agreed to join Russia's coalition against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So everything's in flux. The battle lines, if you were, are not clearly drawn. And at this moment, they're still in dry erase marker. Now, Barclays has slashed their projection for China's gross domestic product after weak data coming in. Partly, we're still seeing this effort in the American financial media to blame China for all that's going on here. But you need to understand that China is an exporting nation. They manufacture and they have agriculture that they sell, and much of what they export in terms of manufactured goods is bought by the United States. The problem is the American people don't have the wages and salaries to sustain our previous consumer economy. China was dependent on that. And as the U.S. economy declines, China has suffered financial harm. It's not China's fault. China's a victim here. But they're trying to put the blame on China and Russia. Because remember, as a class of human beings, politicians will always take credit for everything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. And they will never take responsibility for bad choices, bad decisions, or bad actions. It's always somebody else's fault or the will of the imaginary playmate up in the sky. That's what makes them politicians. Now, Brazil, following their downgrade, did a complete 180 on their stated position for austerity and budget. So they got bludgeoned into going back to being an obedient little vassal state. Peter Hambro is reporting over in Zero Hedge, it is now virtually impossible to get physical gold in London. The supply is starting to dry up. And we're looking at all of the European nations who've been very quietly repatriating their gold from the New York Federal Reserve. And we're hearing that the actual volume of gold left in the New York Federal Reserve is at record lows. And they don't have enough to redeem all that was left with them for safekeeping. They were playing fast and loose with it. We talked about it a year ago on the History Channel's America's Book of Secrets, The Gold Conspiracy, which, by the way, is being rerun. I saw it whiz by the guide on the cable box the other day. And so it looks like we're seeing the beginning of a very quiet gold run. Now, there's another article over at Investment Watch blog pointing out that the COMEX is basically running as a Ponzi scheme. There are now 228 ounces of paper gold claims for every 1 ounce of actual deliverable gold. That is an insane amount of leveraging. Now, so far, all these paper gold contracts, when they come due, they're satisfied by giving the cash equivalent of the value of the gold plus a cash premium to take the paper and ink instead of asking for the physical. That's not going to last much longer. At the point where the gold is increasing in value faster than the inflation is destroying the value of the currency, the holders of those contracts are going to want their gold. And they're not going to accept paper currency in its place. That's a big reason why they are still trying to keep the price of gold manipulated down to delay that crossover point, which will trigger the final gold run on all these bullion depositories that have been playing fast and loose with other people's gold. By the way, a little reminder, most people don't understand. It came up in a conversation earlier today, so I reposted it. Did you know the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private bank, privately owned, it's not part of the federal government, it's no more federal than Federal Express. Do you know they pay no taxes at all? except taxes on the real estate on the ground on which their banks sit. It's right in the Federal Reserve's charter voted through the U.S. Congress that Federal Reserve banks, including the capital stock and surplus and the income derived, are exempt from all federal, state, and local taxation. They make trillions of dollars off of the American people by loaning the public currency out at interest, and they don't have to pay taxes on it one bit. But yet when the financial system gets into trouble, what's the first thing they do? Oh, the taxpayers have to bail us out. That's what you're for, after all. We wouldn't even let you live unless you paid your tax money to us. We own you. Now, there's another story out here over at The Intercept. Officials cover up housing bubble's scummy residue, the fraudulent foreclosure documents. This was a big stink following the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008. Where banks were scrambling to grab properties. The paperwork was spread all over the place with this electronic mortgage registration system, which was actually illegal because it was evading title transfer taxes. And it was a big stink, and it got confused where the note and the mortgage were separated. They couldn't hook them up. So in order to start grabbing properties and put them on the balance sheet, banks resorted to faking the documents for foreclosures. And it wasn't that hard to do. I mean, I actually went out and I got myself a notary seal on eBay. And, so you could fake a notarized document. And they wound up taking homes from people who didn't even have mortgages or had paid off their mortgages. And the mess is still out there. And nobody in the corporate media will report about it. It's still a major problem. It is still harming homeowners. And they don't want to talk about it. Oh, no. Wall Street would never engage in foreclosure fraud. Yeah, they did. They're still doing it. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And before we get back to the news here, I want to respond or comment on two of the items you just heard in this little news break, where they're out there telling you that according to retail numbers, more Americans are out there going out and buying things, which would be a positive indicator. See, things are great, go back to the markets and buy. Well, what they're actually measuring is how much money got spent. And it may not indicate more Americans are going out and buying things when you factor in how much prices have gone up. Because we're all seeing it every day at the supermarket. Or if you're in San Francisco or Los Angeles trying to rent a place. Just because they're getting more money doesn't mean more Americans are able to buy things, just that they're getting more money out of those Americans who are able to buy things. And that's not the same thing. And that does not indicate a healthy, balanced economy. Now, the other story that caught my ear was this push to hold a new vote on the Iran nuclear deal, even though it has already gone down to defeat. And they're pushing really, really hard. And I have to wonder, if they're pushing this hard, does it signal that Israel and AIPAC have succeeded in turning enough senators to get the measure passed this time? Because I can't think of any other reason for them to be pushing for a second vote if they're looking at a second failure. So the skullduggery in the halls of Congress apparently is not yet over. Israel is absolutely out to prove to the world that they are in control of the U.S. government, not the American people. The good news is the American people are watching this. They're seeing how Congress is serving a foreign government's interests and not those of the American people. Remember, it's been over 200 years since Iran actually launched a war of aggression against another country. And the very same people telling you that Iran is a threat, Iran is a threat, is Iran a threat, are the same people who told you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. Just keep that in mind. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. That's the apparent motto of the United States government and the corporate media. Now, getting on back to the economic news. The number of homeless students in the United States has doubled since before the recession. It's an article over an Investment Watch blog, and it comments, teachers are often finding themselves working not only to help the children learn, but to help clothe them, keep them clean, and counsel them. And Claire and I know what that's all about, because one of the programs we're involved with here on Oahu is to get food to kids in school, because the food stamp money runs out in week number 3 of every month, and for that last week, these kids are going to school hungry, and without blood sugar, their brains aren't going to work. Now, at this particular point in our history, your share of the federal government debt, of the official federal government debt, of $13 trillion, works out to about $107,000 per household, plus accruing interest. But just like the unemployment numbers, that official debt is sort of the product of creative bookkeeping, because it doesn't include unfunded mandates, various other obligations that are off book, including all of these loans to prop up Wall Street. It's estimated that the real debt of the federal government ranges anywhere from $94 to $220 trillion. It is simply unpayable. It cannot be repaid ever. All they can do is try and inflate that debt away, which is going to happen somewhere down the road. Apparently, again, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, prices just for parking spaces have gone through the roof. There are 2 new developments in Manhattan that to get a parking space for your car is $1 million. That's unsustainable insanity here. The United States has now dropped to 16th place on the economic freedom list. We're less and less free to decide for ourselves where our money's going to go. We're taught what we have to buy, when we have to buy it. It's a return to 18th century mercantilism, which was a policy Great Britain maintained on all of its colonies, including the American colony, that the government would decide what you were going to buy and who you would buy it from, usually somebody very friendly with the British government. We're right back in the same condition that led to the American Revolution. We're forced to borrow all of our currency at interest from a private central bank. We're told we have to buy vaccines from these companies. We have to buy and eat GMO from these other companies. Our freedom of choice is gone. If there's one inalienable right that all human beings have, it's the right to decide what goes in your body and what does not go in your body. Now, getting on to the political campaigns here, Hillary is not doing very well. Excuse me, that was unprofessional. The Morning Joe panel was basically trashing Hillary Clinton's latest speech, where she's out there with her pre-planned attempt to be more spontaneous and authentic, and came up with the observation that Hillary should fire most of her staff. And yeah, Hillary unfortunately has got a bunch of yes people on her staff who are terrified to actually say anything to her, or they're really good bosom friends, as it were, and not necessarily the best people. And they're talking about how Hillary is so overstage managed that people feel a barrier between her and the audience, along with that very real barrier that is put between Hillary and the corporate media. Now, one of the issues that came up with a recent speech was Hillary came out trying to revive her support among women, which is eroding rapidly, and saying that rape victims have a right to be believed. Well, no, they don't. Because during the heyday of male-bash feminism in the 1990s, rape was the second most falsely reported crime in America, according to the FBI supplemental crime statistics. Rape victims have a right to be heard. But what about all those victims of Hillary's husband's sexual assault? Did Hillary allow them to be heard? No, she didn't. She attacked them, she smeared them, she tried to buy them off, she threatened them. Some of the victims of Bill Clinton's sexual assaults wound up dead. So Hillary's hypocrisy is on full display, and as a result, we're seeing Andrea Mitchell over in Medialite saying women are abandoning Hillary in droves. They can't identify with her. And Hillary's trying to win them back with this sudden surge of feminism and Planned Parenthood and all the rest of it. And over in PatriotRising.com, they've got an article, Goodbye Vagina Vote. See, it wasn't the term that I made up. Clinton support erodes sharply among Democratic women. And when she started out in July, she had 71% of the Democratic female voters were supporting her. Only 42% do now. That's a drop of 29 points in just 8 weeks. Latest poll, 6 in 10 voters say Hillary Clinton likely broke the law with her email server, and we already know that's a fact. She's violated the Espionage Act. She's handed information, classified information, to people who were not cleared to receive it, like Sidney Blumenthal and her lawyer, David Kendall. And the situation gets worse, and I still think somebody needs to be looking into if that weak email server and the Clinton Foundation are actually an espionage operation run out of the State Department by Hillary for the benefit of the Clintons. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Hillary Clinton's fall from the peaks of power and fame and grace. And everybody's finally starting to face up to the reality. Hillary's got some serious problems. Even over at the Washington Post, they're admitting Hillary Clinton's email issues have become a massive political problem. They're talking about the decline in her poll numbers, more than 20 points just since July. That's almost free fall in political terms. And polls are showing right now that if the election were held today between Trump and Hillary, it's a dead heat. And Trump's numbers are going up and Hillary's are going down. And the Washington Post is saying, yeah, the email server is the issue. And they may not even know the depth of the real scandal behind that private email server. We'll get onto that in a little bit. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, it turns out that the emails Hillary turned over to Judicial Watch and to the State Department turn out to have very large gaps in the timeline. The gaps total 5 months. One gap is a month all by itself. Nobody is going to believe that the Secretary of State of the United States of America did not have any official business for an entire month. And that opens up Hillary to a perjury charge because she testified under oath she turned over all of the official emails. So remember, Richard Nixon was missing 18 minutes. Hillary is missing 5 months. And there's a little bit of a delicious irony in there when you consider that Hillary's first job in Washington was on the Watergate Committee, from which she was booted for ethics violations. Now, over at Op-Ed News, they're raising another issue, that there are huge numbers of emails in Hillary's record regarding Haiti and what was going on down there. Following the massive earthquake they had, everybody was zipping on in, we're bringing humanitarian aid, and what actually happened is that Haiti basically got bought for pennies on the dollar from the Haitian people, and there's all these luxury developments and everything going on down there. And apparently the U.S. State Department was a facilitator of what was going on down there. Malfeasance of USAID, you've heard that name before. So there's another scandal brewing down there of complicity in basically taking advantage of a natural disaster to take Haiti away from the Haitian people. Still more information coming out is that the Clinton Foundation had financial links to the oligarchs behind the coup d'etat in Kiev. The Clinton Foundation helped fund the overthrow of the legitimate government of Ukraine early last year. That's coming out. So Hillary's numbers are down. Trump's numbers are going up here. Meanwhile, Chelsea Clinton, who's being groomed to be the next generation of dynastic rulers of this country, good luck, is out there expressing surprise that not everybody loves her mother. How can they not? Actually, it is amazing that I guess Chelsea had a sheltered life. What can I tell you? Meanwhile, a more serious story over at Politico. Wall Street is now in a panic. Ever since Jeremy Corbyn actually won the leadership position of Britain's Labour Party, everybody is having to wake up and realize Trump could actually pull it off. He could win the White House if he's not shot off the podium the way Robert Kennedy was. And Wall Street's in a panic because Trump isn't owned by them. He's got enough of his own money, he can't be bought. And because he is a businessman, he's a naive politician, but he is an experienced businessman, he's going to put Wall Street back on a business-like footing, meaning you either make it or you don't on your own, and we stop sticking the American people with all the costs of these mistakes and crimes and corruptions. I don't think we're going to get through to election 2016 next year without a little wet work. It almost seems like we could see a repeat of that horrible season in the 60s when Robert Kennedy was killed, somebody tried to kill George Wallace, Martin Luther King was killed, John F. Kennedy was killed. A lot of wet work back then. We may be in for a repeat. Okay, now yesterday there was a big story on the news where the FBI had arrested a plotter in a threat against his popeness. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Well, it turns out this is another one of those FBI-created booga-boogas. Because who they arrested was this teenager in New Jersey that was arrested and charged with plotting an attack against the Pope. And the police commissioner of New Jersey, Charles Ramsey, said, this is being blown way out of proportion. Okay, this guy made an off-the-cuff comment. There's no indication he had the ability to actually do anything. No proof that he was going to do anything. He just mouthed off. And they're trying to make a big deal about it to say, there was a threat against the Pope that we have successfully found. No, what you're finding are idiots who don't know how to keep their lips zipped around FBI undercover informants. Now, we're seeing a story that's just breaking now where apparently the latest pitch from Israel to the United States are the demands that Israel is making to go along with allowing the United States to keep the P5+1 deal. And maybe this second vote in the Senate was a little bit of saber rattling to push the deal through. But according to this report that we are getting from wakeupfromyourslumber.com, Israel is demanding the West Bank and the Golan Heights be made officially a part of Israel in return for their most beneficent blessing of the U.S. staying with the Iran deal. That's it. And that's our compensation for you refusing to do what we told you to do. Israel's arrogance is on full display for the entire world to see. And I hope Americans are looking at this very closely, and they're remembering the names of everybody in the House and Senate who very clearly are working for a foreign ruler. Because we need to scrub the capital of all of those people next election. Because even if Donald Trump wins the White House, he's not going to be able to do much of anything unless we, the people, give him a Congress that is going to put American interests ahead of any others. So it's not just replacing the president. It's not just keeping the dynastic rulers, the Bushes and the Clintons, from power. We need to scrub the Congress out of all these friends of Israel, because they are no friends of America. Now, there's a story where the NYPD is saying the hot dog vendors at the World Trade Center pose a terror risk. Now, I'll admit those are not very good hot dogs, but I do think the New York Police Department is overreacting. But apparently they want to get those carts out of there. If you want to eat, go to the expensive restaurant up on the 102nd floor. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And I'm watching on Fox News. They're back to this whole thing about China's hacker threat against the United States of America. And so here we have the U.S. government, which is completely unable to find any of the cyber criminals, ransomware, Viagra ads in your mailbox, identity thieves. Haven't been able to find or stop any of those people, but the U.S. government is sure China is behind some hacking attacks against the U.S., and we already know that Obama is going to hit China with economic sanctions. It's got nothing to do with hacking. We are in the middle of an economic war, a war of the dollar against the ruble and the yuan to try and recapture the world, bring them back under dollar hegemony. Because without the world using the dollar for global trade and banking and purchase of natural resources, and the U.S. able to make a percentage off of all of those transactions, the U.S. economy is going to collapse. We don't have manufacturing. Nobody wants our agriculture. The U.S. is dependent on keeping the world using the U.S. dollar and paying the interest and fees thereof. That's what's going on. And, of course, the problem with economic wars is it's very easy for them to break into full-on, outright bloody wars, which seems to be where we're going. Now, speaking of blood, yesterday there was a shooting incident at Delta State University. There was a young professor was shot dead in his office. A lot of people were saying, was it a mass shooting, ban guns? Others were saying it was another gun grabber fantasy. As it turns out, this one was pretty mundane. Apparently, this had to do, the shooter thought his domestic partner was having an affair with the professor at Delta State University. And the shooter shot his domestic partner, went over to Delta State University, shot the professor, and then ultimately, when he was cornered by police, shot himself. So the first question I have is, what prescription antidepressants was this guy on? And apparently this kind of dilly-dallying is very common in higher education. I thought it was confined to politics. By the way, John Oliver did an amazing story about those two politicians in Michigan who have now been kicked out of the legislature because of their little adulterous affair. Apparently, the dean of the Stanford Business School has had to step down because of a sex scandal and resulting lawsuit. So they're having a lot of fun over there in the halls of higher education. Can't have free speech, can't criticize Israel, but there's a lot of hot party action going on back there in the chancellor's office. Now, there's a very interesting story. There's apparently some kind of military activity going on along the east coast of the United States, and it's interfering with U.S. aerial surveillance and also certain safety systems for airliners like TCAS. And there are people asking the FAA to explain, I mean, these NOTAMs have been put on out there. What is going on? What are they testing that these emergency standard safety systems are going to be disabled? Be a perfect time for ISIS to launch a sneak attack or simulations thereof, facsimile thereof, as it were here. Up in Oakland, their school district has called an emergency meeting over the growing public outcry to the mandatory vaccinations that were just passed into law. And Oakland is considering asking the Department of Education as an entire district for exemption waivers. Because the alternative is parents are saying they're going to take their kids out of the public school system and homeschool them rather than risk having them harmed by these dangerous, dangerous chemicals. If I were fortunate enough to have children and unfortunate enough to be living in California, I would do exactly the same. You are not going to stick that needle into my kid. Okay, speaking of Congressman, Southwest Florida Republican Representative Trey Radell got busted for cocaine. And I love the smell of burning hypocrite in the morning because this guy voted for mandatory drug testing of food stamp recipients. We don't need to drug test the food stamp recipients. They don't have enough money to be buying these kind of drugs. We need mandatory drug testing for everybody in the government. They're capable of causing much more harm than the food stamp recipients. Now, a little bit of common sense over in California. They're considering a bill, probably going to pass, that would prohibit all of the police in the state of California from acquiring armored tanks and grenade launchers, which makes a lot of sense. These are civilian police departments. They're supposed to be, directing traffic, catching jaywalkers, muggers, burglars, that kind of thing. They don't need military tanks. They certainly don't need grenade launchers to use against the civil population, or at least we hope they don't think they need that. Now, also out in California, there's a farmers group that has formed a new co-op They are all going to be growing organic, non-GMO food and selling it labeled organic, non-GMO. Now, Monsanto succeeded in blocking Prop 37 in California, which would have mandated labeling for food with GMO, but there's no law that prohibits somebody growing non-GMO food from labeling it as such. I'm sure that will be in the offing from Monsanto very, very soon. It's unfair. It's restriction of trade. You can't offer non-GMO food just because people don't want our GMO food. But that's the trend. And by the way, I've noticed a lot of processed food commercials are starting to talk about getting rid of the chemicals, getting rid of the artificial dyes, because that's what consumers want. They may not be telling the truth. There was a big stink over Kashi, which was this high-end cereal marketed for healthy and natural and so forth, and it was found out to carry more glyphosate than Fruit Loops does. So you have to be careful and understand that TV commercials will lie, and I know, I used to work in TV advertising, and I didn't like it when the commercials were lying, but I wasn't in a position to be able to do anything about it. Another interesting article, this got posted all over the place from Blacklisted News, talking about how public school students in the United States are the new inmates. And it's talking about how children, from the moment they enter public schooling, they're exposed to this steady diet of draconian zero-tolerance policies that criminalize normal childhood behavior, criminalizing speech. They're being brainwashed to be silent, obedient drones, which will make them useful soldiers someday. But they're coming out of these schools unable to compete in a modern global technology marketplace, which is why so many companies are having to use H-1B visas to bring educated, trained people from other countries for the few high-tech jobs remaining in this country. But I look at some of what's been going on in the schools, and on top of that, those Michelle Obama lunches, it's like they're training our kids to grow up expecting to live their entire lives in a concentration camp. And maybe that's what the plan is. Under Agenda 21, you will spend your life in a little cubicle, you will eat the food we will give you, and you will be happy. Alabama is adding evolution to their science standards in education. And the Bible bangers are screaming their minds off, you can't teach evolution in public schools. Okay, we'll let you teach, creation in public schools as long as we can teach nuclear physics in the church. Have you ever noticed there's no two-way street on that? They want to teach Bible banging in the churches and in the public schools. Look, you've got your church. You can teach your mythology about, magic apples and talking snakes, all that you want inside your churches, but the schools are supposed to deal with the real world. Okay, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. We're getting a report that a case of bubonic plague has been confirmed up in Michigan. Gee, I wonder how that got into the country. For those of you not up on your medieval history, the bubonic plague is also called the Black Death. Now, getting into your daily dose of booga booga, Fox News is reporting that law enforcement bulletins are warning that ISIS will stage lone wolf terror attacks in America. So they're ramping up the terror booga booga ahead of a potential false flag, or just to keep us all scared and clinging to Big Daddy government. Please save me from the evil terrorists. Take my money, take my freedoms, take my child. Just save me from the bad man. So let's spend a few minutes talking about human-caused global warming. Now, over at Information Clearinghouse, there was an interesting little article, and I think it was written in response to the growing tendency for people to say, look, the government lies about the economy, they lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons, they lied about 9/11, they lied about blah, 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 blah. Why should we believe them about human-caused global warming? And this article seems to be a reply because the headline is 9/11 and global warming, are they both false conspiracy theories? And it starts out saying, yes, the government lied about all these things, but that's no reason to doubt that human-caused global warming is real. So they're desperate to keep this little hoax going, even now. And we're heading into another record-setting winter. Remember back March 20th, 2000? UK independence, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And today it's global warming causes snow and ice. By the way, over the last 3 years, there's been a 26% increase in Arctic sea ice. You wouldn't know it reading the Washington Post. They had an article out today saying it's the fourth lowest on record. And where are they getting their information? From NOAA, which, like every other government agency, is fudging the data for political reasons. We've become worse than the former Soviet Union. Everything is decided by politics. Reality and facts, not even a factor anymore. By the way, you know that experimental Marine unit that was mixed gender and was found to be less effective than all-male units in combat testing? Apparently the ladies on that unit are screaming that, this is male, patriarchal. It's not politically correct to say that we're not the equal of men. And political correctness cannot trump reality. Unfortunately, a lot of politically correct people think otherwise, which leads to some major embarrassments. I remember when the Navy put out their first female F-14 pilot, and when she was out there doing carrier quals, she slammed her F-14 into the back of the carrier. And I'm not saying she couldn't have done a better job with a little more training, but they did. They rushed her along and said, we have to have a female Tomcat pilot to put out there for the press. Political correctness cannot trump reality, and that includes global warming. Now, we are hearing over in the Daily Mail, brace yourself for a very cold winter. Forecasters warn recent bad weather could be start of the most powerful El Nino phenomenon since 1950. Well, I wouldn't ascribe it to El Nino. Yes, the El Nino current, which we now know is created by undersea volcanoes, does change the weather patterns, but the cooling is coming from a very simple fact. Solar output is in decline. The sun's energy is not a constant. There's an 11-year sunspot cycle, 22-year magnetic cycle. Now they're aware that there appear to be 60 and 120-year cycles, and all of them are overlapping starting next year. And it is going to be a very, very brutal winter, and that's why all the carbon Nazis are out there saying human-caused global warming causes snow and ice. See, they're kind of stuck. They tried to rebrand as climate change, but if they acknowledge the planet is getting cooler, then everybody's going to say taxing carbon won't fix that. So they have to keep on saying warming, 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 carbon dioxide, you will pay us a carbon tax. And Mother Nature just went the other way. And I'm sure the carbon Nazis are going to declare war on Mother Nature, the way Caligula declared war on Poseidon and had his soldiers stab the ocean with spears, which is about as effective as anything the global warming people are doing. Over at Fukushima, bad news. As you know, we're having this horrendous storm season in the Pacific. So far, we've been very lucky here in Hawaii. We've dodged 3 major bullets. We've had a lot of rain and thunder showers, but not like they're getting over there in Asia. And there's major rain, multiple storms. The ground is saturated, and flood waters have swept across the remains of the Fukushima power plant. It's sweeping more radiation out to the ocean, and worse, they're saying it is sufficient enough to cause structural problems in the remains of the buildings that are still standing there, which could lead to more collapses and more problems with those spent reactor fuel rods. It is a mess. And I would like to go back to an issue I raised a long time ago. We now know that Israel and the United States created the Stuxnet virus specifically to target the Siemens controller systems in Iran's centrifuge factory to get them to overspin and destroy themselves. We also know Stuxnet broke into the wild, and it went all across Asia, causing problems for any industrial facilities using those standard Siemens controllers. They're sold all over the world. They're very useful devices. I actually used one many years ago. I automated an Oxbury animation stand with stepping motors and Siemens controllers. They're actually fun to play with if you're really into talking to the bare metal. We know that Stuxnet was in computers surrounding Fukushima before the quake and tsunami. And we also know when the quake and tsunami hit, the safety systems at Fukushima did not operate the way they were supposed to. And they do use those Siemens controllers. We have to look at the very real possibility that in their haste to get those gosh darned Iranians, the creators of Stuxnet may have made what happened at Fukushima far worse than it otherwise should have been. Instead of being a minor disaster, they turned it into a global catastrophe. Small price to pay for getting Iran, of course, seems to be the thinking coming out of the war hawks. It doesn't matter who we poison or kill or torture. We have to keep our eye on the prize of victory. So forth and so on. Now, there's another little story coming out of John Rappaport where he's talking about the issue of vaccine safety. And he's been looking into the issue of whether the HIV virus really is the cause of AIDS, because there's been a growing awareness that not everybody with what is thought to be the H1V virus comes down with the symptoms of AIDS, and there are people who have the symptoms of AIDS where they can't find the virus. And it may be that Dr. Gallo kind of jumped the gun in his race with the Pasteur Institute to get the earliest patents for the huge amount of money that was going to be made off of this illness. And apparently John Rappaport was talking to a virologist who chose to remain anonymous, basically saying, there's a political clamp on this thing. Careers are on the line. We don't talk about it, just like we're hearing from other industries. They don't talk about the harm GMO causes. They don't talk about the harm vaccines causes. It's all driven by the money and the health of the patient and the safety and efficacy of the product just don't seem to be a factor any longer. This desire, this need to get little pieces of paper with ink on them to keep paying the interest to our debt slave masters has destroyed the best qualities of the American culture. We've lost our moral compass. We've lost our sense of ethics. We've lost our sense of fair play. They're almost treated like those are old-fashioned concepts completely out of place in the modern world of commerce, which is make money, it doesn't matter how, pay off the harm that you caused, declare bankruptcy to protect yourself from further lawsuits, and retire to the Caymans. And that may be good for the individuals who play that game, but it's not good for the nation as a whole. And what our country is really missing more than anything else right now is somebody looking at the overview of the nation as a whole and what is good for the long term. I hope Trump will adopt that perspective. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some errands done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. So until then, aloha, America.